Oh my goodness. Love it, love it, love it.
That was incredible. Thank you.
Thank you.
For me on my phone, it's because this is where I write my notes now because I love
Okay.
I'm really happy. I'm so happy you spoke about this. I'm so happy. I think it's so important, especially sorry, I do come from a psychology background.
Oh,
So
no problem.
that's why I know the real annoyance and issues, especially with conditions like OCD, that people have this, and that's what I want to speak about, is the idea of yes, we all know that it's you're seen as a social pariah and it's like really a problem, but the trivialization of mental disorders, how do you feel, especially yours? OCD is extremely trivialized, and I hate it how people are like, oh my gosh, I'm so OCD today. Because what, you line something up,
I hear you.
So
It's frustrating. It's frustrating because, people don't realize the trauma that exists behind OCD and how it literally is your worst enemy. There's nothing, I don't wish that on my worst enemy at all. It is one of the most painful things you will ever go through. Physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, in my case as well. It's something that touches on every aspect of your life. Nothing is sort of off the agenda. Nothing is out of reach, right? It affects your relationships with your family. It affects your relationship with your friends. It affects your academic performance. I'm someone who I had the best experience in my undergraduate, loved what I did, and performed, by God's grace, really well in my undergrad degree. But when OCD hit, I was basically getting 50s and failing other things. And it's so, geez, it takes over your whole life. So yeah, I think that's something that people need to realize, is that it is incredibly, it's a disorder. I mean, or well, not a disorder, I guess. It's an illness. It's not a personality type, if that makes sense.
Sorry, and then one more thing on that is this idea of psychiatrist versus, I want to just mention one more thing. When you were mentioning stigma and stuff, I also want to say that diabetes stigma is a big thing. There's a lot of fat phobia.
Okay, hear you.
A lot of fat phobia, really important to mention that.
That's true. Yeah.
It's a big thing. It's a massive thing. Sorry, that was just one thing. But the other thing is, as I said, speaking about psychologists versus psychiatrists, and coming up with what you think from your personal experience, because the issue comes around is that in psychology we have something called mirroring, which is like when you mirror. I love to say we, even though I've given it up for gender studies. So when you have a psychologist from a similar background and you relate with someone on that versus someone who is from a completely different one. So there's a lot of different pros and cons to that, versus, I don't want someone in my cultural background to, be in my life because I can't share things with them because I think they will judge me. But what do you think? What do you think works best for for you? What worked best for you in terms of?
It's crazy. I think not crazy. Sorry. It's wild. I think it really comes down to the person. So I've come from a background where I've grown up around white people and whiteness my whole life. So I'm pretty comfortable when it comes to that, right? Whereas there are sort of, and maybe any brown or black girls here will attest to the fact that there does tend to be black girl politics. And this is not to demonize black girls at all or to demonize brown-skinned women, but the experience that I had growing up was that I couldn't relate to them because I felt that there was a lot of judgment. And I think that was maybe internalized. But thank goodness that's not the case anymore. I think that was just me projecting on other people. And so for me, it's, initially I wouldn't want to see someone who was like me because I thought, maybe she would judge me, maybe she would, see me in sort of a lower light. And so I would go and see sort of people who are from other racial groups or, you know, other cultures, because I thought maybe they would be a little bit more aware of sort of their own biases. But that's slowly changed, I think, just in terms of my political education in university, where I'm feeling a lot more comfortable in my Blackness and able to have relationships with Black psychiatrists and Black psychologists and therapists.
Okay, can I rock and roll? So first, I just wanted to say just a statement. I've been thinking quite a bit recently about how much I'd like, honestly, one day when the time comes, it'd be so awesome to actually like sit together as a group and meet everyone. Because I've been thinking I've learned so much about, I mean, I know some people on the group, but not everyone. And I just feel like I know everyone so well, but I've actually never met you in person. And just from your stories, like I have friends that I'll know in person, but I won't know. Often we don't know background stories. We'll just bump into someone at a bar and you'll get introduced, but you don't know where they've come from, what's their life story. And I think that this platform has been so amazing because it's made me realize that, you know, when you actually meet someone for the first time, normally we'll just judge them by like how they're dressed or are they cool or whatever. And then we either accept them or we don't from that. And I just think that this group's been so amazing in terms of like, all these talks are so amazing. And people open up and it's so refreshing. That's basically what I'm trying to say. Like, I'd love to meet all of you guys one day.
Yeah, likewise.
So thank you for that talk, Obakhe. And then my question, just in terms of the medical part, the medical myth or that kind of thing. Could you explain that a bit more? Not because I'm questioning it. I've got no idea about the medical side of this kind of thing. You're saying there's like a 10-year lag or delay.
Right.
In recognizing it and then the drug aspect of dealing with it.
Yes. So basically this was given by I can't remember who, but an advisor to the US government. He was giving a TED talk and basically speaking about how we need to revolutionize medical care for people who suffer from mental illnesses. And basically his main thesis statement was to say, when we look at a particular illness, mental illness, you can sort of see the brain scan and it lights up certain parts of the brain. An OCD brain will look different to a schizoaffective disorder brain, and will look different to a bipolar brain, for example. And so all those brain scans are indicative of, okay, there's activity in certain parts of the brain that leads me to diagnose this person with OCD or bipolar or schizophrenia, etc. Those brain scans and sort of the activity that is linked with different diagnoses is already spotted 10 years before you see it overtly or you sort of recognize it expressly. So if I go to a psychiatrist and I say, listen, I have this theory that I'm a mass murderer and I have actually committed a number of genocides in my past life. That is a symptom, that's an overt symptom, which the psychiatrist can then take and say, okay, well, that's usually associated with schizoaffective, schizophrenia. Okay, I think you might have some sort of schizophrenic or schizoaffective disorder, right? But those sort of the activity in my brain that's led to those outward symptoms has already started happening and can be recognizable by science at least a decade prior to me showing my symptoms. Which means that there's a 10-year gap between me actually having the mental illness and me showing the mental illness, which means that there's a 10-year gap of treatment that I haven't been treated for at least 10 years, as this has slowly, incrementally grown in my brain and in my behavior. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Thank you.
No problem.
Could I just also add to that? So how would we then actually know whether or not to, for example, even go and find out if you have, like, if there is a brain scan that is required, if you don't see the symptoms? Do you know what I mean? So like, how do we now shorten that delay or that gap?
Right. Thank you for saying that. I think the first thing, I don't think I mentioned this in terms of policy suggestions, but I do think it's important that we start to normalize um, taking care of your brain and taking care of your mind from the outset. So when we're speaking about, oh, I have a dentist checkup, I have a doctor's checkup, these sort of procedures need to be sort of part and parcel of our lives from a very early age. So when parents take their kids to go have an MRI scan or go have certain brain scans done, or an ECG, for example, that sort of needs to happen at an earlier time. And yes, I think that will sort of help to catch some of the cases. But some other cases, you may not see that activity. And I think that's where science then needs to develop and continue to use a greater sample of different people and control samples to sort of see how a particular mental illness plays out in a number of different contexts and a number of different people. So I think science itself needs to catch up, but I think also just socially, politically, we need to normalize taking care of our minds and taking care of our brains.
Sorry, just to add on that, it's such a new thing, and that's I'm so glad you brought it up, because literally, as I said, neuropsychology as a postgrad was only introduced the year that I graduated. So that's after 2018. So you couldn't do it as a postgrad. It was such a new field within, and UCT is one of the main ones to actually do it. And those are the people that need to be, pushing for this, because you don't see a neuropsychologist or a neuroscientist, how are you supposed to know how your brain is, doing?
Right. It's very niche, right? So, when we talk about neuroscientists or neurologists, we sort of see them in sort of ivory towers very far away. We only look at them when there's really a problem, right? But they should be within our contact list. I have a family doctor, I have a family neurologist, I have a family, this and that. So we're actually taking into account all of our body, and the seen parts and the unseen parts.
Awesome. I think it's me now. So I'm so inspired by you. I think you are one of the future leaders of the world, 100%. This was the head girl of our school, and I can't tell you how excited I am for your future. And I'm so excited you went into law. I think you're going to make some difference in that whole.
Thank you.
So yeah, thank you for your honesty with this, because I remember from school that you really struggled with this, and I didn't understand it at all. I had no idea what you were going through. So hearing this now and thinking back to then has given me such insight into what was going on. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. I didn't know it. I didn't know either at the time. I only recently figured out what was going on with me in 2013 last year. So yeah, I'm in the same boat as you.
Crazy times. We're all healing from the past, aren't we? So I'm just 4 questions. Just gonna throw them at you. The first one is, what were the most effective ways that you overcame this? I mean, you spoke about rehabilitating yourself. What went into that? If there's someone out there who's in this position, what can they do to be in a better space than they are right now? Then what are the most damaging things people have said or done? I mean, I know you spoke about the job market and them not having any sort of idea or way to handle your email that you sent them, but even just friends, school environments, like, what have people done, said, whatever, that, we could be better at not doing?
Okay.
And then with OCD, do you ever get scared of your own mind? I often find when I think of mental illnesses, I get quite scared, because I think, like, jeepers, the mind is a powerful, scary thing. Like, it is, Can you chat on that?
Sure.
And then how can we identify people or little things you can pick up in kids or friends or family, to say, okay, maybe they're struggling with OCD. Let me have a conversation with them and get them the help they need. Because I personally always thought it was the categorization thing. I never knew there were so many spectrums of this.
Right. Okay, thank you so much. I think those are really great questions. So the first one was, what are sort of the most effective ways that I've dealt with OCD, right, going forward? The first thing, and this is something that I'm very new to as well, was last year I really felt the sense when I was going through a lot of what I was going through was to write it down. So from the first day, I just wrote it all down. I'm having this and this thought about this person and this type of person. I am freaking out. It makes me feel so dirty as a human being. It makes me feel evil. And I would write all those things out. And this is where I just need to add a little caveat that take my advice with the help of a psychiatrist or a therapist, please, right? Because one of the things with OCD is that we look for assurance. So we go to the internet, we research, oh my word, okay, somebody else has it. Okay, I'm fine, I'm cool. And that's something that I did. In my case, it helped because I started learning about POCD and HOCD and all those different things. But in other cases, it can add to your thoughts. So for example, I bought a book when I was struggling with this. I bought a book from Google Books and I started reading it thinking, this is going to give me all the answers to, how to get out of this. And one of the case studies was a man who was changing his daughter's diaper, and he had the intrusive thought to molest her, essentially. And as soon as I saw that, I sort of dropped the book, and that thought never left me. So it's really important that when you do this, you do this with the help of a therapist or with a health practitioner. So that was one of the first things. Another one that I needed to remind myself of is to disengage. It's not my fight. It's not my fight. And to embrace the uncertainty as well. So there's something called the theory of trust. And it's the idea that, I have no idea. I have no idea what's going to happen in the future. I don't know if I'm going to be involved in a hit and run. I don't know if I'm going to kill my parents. But one thing I know is that this unease from the thought of killing my parents of being, evil towards other people is causing me a lot of unease, right? And that should show me something. That shows me that that's not who I am. And that's something that I had to keep reminding myself of. These sexual thoughts cause you a lot of discomfort. That's not who you are because you've got anxiety because of those thoughts. That makes sense. So it's been a lot of that. But I think medically we can talk about emotional, or CBT rather, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. And it is like the gold standard for people with OCD, right? You go to a psychiatrist or a CBT practitioner rather, and they help you through emotional response therapy, right? So let's say I have a fear of chargers. They will put a charger in front of me and we'll learn breathing techniques while looking at the charger. And slowly but surely, one day I'll get to touch the charger and I'll be able to deal with sort of the anxiety that's invoked by that. And another thing that really helps with that is mindfulness as well. So it's the idea that you sort of learn to be okay with the thoughts as they come, and not necessarily to thought block, which I think is very dangerous. But once you have a thought, to learn to reduce the anxiety while the thought is there. So that's the first thing. I'm sorry, I talk a lot. That's the first thing. The second thing is, what are the most damaging things people do? One of the most damaging things is just assuming that you don't want to work, or that you somehow are not up to a challenge. I had a psychiatrist who did that. That was very damaging. I had a psychiatrist when I was 16. The first psychiatrist I was experienced with that psychiatrist. He diagnosed me with 5 mental disorders in one sitting. I had bipolar, schizophrenia, obsessive compulsive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, seasonal affective disorder, and a whole bunch of stuff. And that was incredibly hurtful because I started sort of manifesting that in my own life. Oh my word, maybe I am seeing someone, maybe I am, doing things. So that was incredibly damaging. But I think the one that hurts the most is when you tell someone your story and you can just see they don't know what to do with it. It's just too much. That's really hurtful. It would just be better for them to say, whoa, that's a lot. I'm unable to compute that, rather than keep quiet and you sort of like, are they judging me? What's going on? So I think that was probably the most damaging thing, both from practitioners and from friends. Oh, and another damaging thing, thank goodness, I was going to write about this. Another damaging thing is don't address the thought, address the reason for the thought, right? So for example, if I say, I feel like I'm going to kill someone, you don't say to someone, you're not going to kill someone. It doesn't help. Because for me as an OCD person, I almost believe 100% that I'm going to kill someone. The best thing that someone can do with someone who suffers from OCD is to ask the question, why? I feel like I'm going to kill someone. Why do you feel like you're going to kill someone? Well, I feel like I'm going to kill someone because, I don't know, there are knives all around me. Or I feel that I'm going to grab a knife. Why are you going to grab a knife? And ultimately, when you ask someone why and why and why, you unraveling that thought process until you get to the point where, for me, my fundamental why was I believe that I'm an evil person. And I believe that I'm just super, just not normal. I'm an evil human being. And that was where my work began, to unravel that, to say, no, you're not an evil human being. And here's the evidence for that. So it's so important to see the why. Sure. Do I get scared of my own mind? Every day. I pray about it every day. My biggest fear is I don't know when the next hit will come. And that scares me to no end. OCD usually comes when there's a lot of stress and it sort of plays up. And so going into the working world next year, I'm thinking about those things. I'm thinking about, man, I don't know if I'm just going to have sort of a breakdown in front of my superior. But oftentimes, and I think it's maybe related to OCD, but not really, I think a lot and I get headaches. So I'll be thinking a lot in my bed at night and I just won't go to sleep. And those are the times when I get really scared, to think one day my mind may actually kill me. And that's a reality that I live with every day. Geez. Anxiety. You'll usually see anxiety happening around certain things, right? So if it's time for me and mom to wash our hands, and I'm showing a little bit of reluctance with regards to washing my hands, for example, or maybe I'm super keen to wash my hands, or there is anxiety around talking to a certain person or doing a certain thing, I think it's very important for parents just to become more aware of their kids' movements and their kids' reactions to certain things. And when you see sort of anxiety around a particular thing, I would start to sort of raise alarm bells for OCD, because there's sort of anxiety that's around that particular activity, and there could be a why behind that. So that's the first thing that I would do. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Orbs. That was super informative and awesome. Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
I say something about the last one about like picking it up in people. I think what we need to work on is also building that emotional vocabulary for people to be able to explain things, because a lot of times when it's in your head you build it up, but then if you can put it into words you really are able to unpack. I think about what you were saying about asking the why. So similar types of questions, like if when you have kids, if you're around small children and they feeling a bit anxious about things, I think it would be really great to like try to unpack like why are they feeling that way, what is the root cause of that, right? The same thing like I guess with depression, it's like you can put it under the label of sad, right? But there's so many other feelings, other emotions that you can feel. So like I had this thing where I didn't know how to express my emotions in words because sad just wasn't enough, right? Empty wasn't enough. So I had a color spectrum, right? So I'd wake up and I'm like, what color do I feel like today? only I know the annotation between the color and that, right?
Yeah.
And everyone might associate things with different. I know, like, if I felt forest green, that was a terrible day. I just felt like things were really bad. I don't know why, right? And I remember trying to explain it to someone, and they were like, "Oh, but that's such a happy color," right? It really, I don't know, it like helps you. I know words would be easier because other people would be able to understand it. But
Yeah.
really trying to unpack, right? That type.
I've done something similar with music. In like a therapy session, I was also struggling with trying to find the right words, and she was like, "Well, find me a few songs, find a few songs on your phone," and that became a really good way for me to express myself.
That's amazing.
At a time I couldn't explain stuff.
Thank you again for the vulnerability and for sharing your story. I think it's really just empowering when you can hear from someone else's experience, what they're going through, and then it kind of gives you more perspective on, other people. It may seem on the surface sometimes that, oh, I don't know why they're doing this or why they're being like this, and we always sort of make our own assumptions about how other people are appearing without actually understanding all that they're going through, especially in their minds, like you said. So this is very insightful. So thank you for that. And a few things that I also wanted to speak about was how, like when you're saying about, how you can add, mindfulness into this whole thing, but also to me, it is also about not judging yourself for the thoughts.
Yes.
I feel like the word judgment really plays a big role here because, when you kind of feel like I'm a bad person for having these thoughts,
Yes.
you are inherently judging yourself for having those thoughts.
Yes.
And that is already self-fulfilling, I guess.
Yeah.
And yeah, so maybe just we can touch on a little bit more about that. And one other thing is, how do we show support, I guess? Like, what is something that, what would you have appreciated last year, when you were at the peak of this, from your peers and friends? Like, how would you have wanted to be supported?
Okay. No, I hear you. With regards to the first thing, yes, a culture of non-judgment. And I think non-judgment, not only a mental illness, but just at a societal level as well. And once we cultivate it at a societal level, it's less likely to happen when we're talking about mental illnesses or those types of things that are happening, right? So actually, one of the people that I follow, her name is Obsessively Ever After on Instagram. She's amazing. She suffers from OCD, but she also is a CBT practitioner. And recently, one of her posts was exactly that. She was replacing certain words. So this one person said, "I'm a bad person because I'm having these awful thoughts." And she sort of scratched out bad person and awful thoughts. And she said, "I am a human who is struggling with intrusive thoughts." And it's just about sort of relabeling the thing and to remind yourself of who you are as a person. And that's why I think sort of using the anxiety in some ways as sort of an indicator for that. And what I mean by that is, when I'm having sort of anxiety about certain thoughts, instead of judging myself for those thoughts, instead I reaffirm myself to say, I'm having these thoughts. These thoughts are causing me a lot of anxiety. That means these thoughts are not in my value set, which means that I'm actually not a bad person. I'm not sort of an evil human being because of these things, because they cause me discomfort. So I think it's really important to remind ourselves of that and to use the anxiety almost as a tool for doing that. Sure, what did I really like from what people did? One thing I couldn't do for about 3 months was I couldn't eat. I would have to give someone money and say, "Can you just order me whatever? And I'll eat it," but I can't make that decision. So that was really helpful for people to order me food or to cook for me. That was really great. Another thing that I really enjoyed was just to help out with menial tasks. You have no idea how insurmountable of a task it is to do washing when you're mentally ill. It's like the worst thing in the world. You sit there for weeks and weeks and weeks and the washing is not done and it causes more anxiety. So one person who I really love, shout out to Taylor Steven, she just asked me, "Can I do your washing sometime? Can I do your groceries?" And so sometimes just addressing sort of the peripheral things and not really the heart of it is what's really important. Because some people are not ready to talk about their mental health. Some people are not ready to talk about their mental illness. But take care of my dishes, and that's great. That makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely think, sorry, just to butt in there, I think that's super helpful. I know, like, I was super stressed in a project week, and I was like frazzling and I couldn't read, dyslexia was going wild.
Yeah.
And someone was just like, hey, I'll read this to you, like, pass it here. And like, there was no questions asked, nothing had to be declared. It was just like, cool, do you want to do point 4 says this and this? And I just think, let's just make that cool again, to be like, hey, I see you in a rough patch, not going to ask questions as to why.
Yes.
Can I just do the dishes? I think that's awesome and really easy for anyone to do.
Yeah.
Obakhe, I'm just blown away. I think it's just so enlightening to hear about something that I know very little about, and very empowering to realize that there's still so much to learn. It's actually interesting. I was listening to a podcast today, and it fits perfectly because it's about mental health and how it's something that's completely disregarded. Like, people think of mental health in terms of mental illness, and it's like something that, it's once you, as you were saying, once the illness manifests, that's when you get, diagnosed, and then it's taken care of. Whereas people don't know how to prevent, or not necessarily prevent, but how to like feed their mental health and keep their mental state healthy, which I think is interesting, and an interesting concept, because I feel like, especially in South Africa, where there's so many other problems that are focused on, like, things that are more, I think that
Well publicized.
it's like more, like more visual, like you can see it, as opposed
More concrete,
to like, yeah, exactly. It's like, diabetes or cardiovascular problems, or malnourishment, I don't know, things like that, which you're able to see. It's much easier to then not necessarily diagnose, but even just like think about. So I think
like, people will say, you can email a lecturer, be like, have really bad tummy ache, stomach bug, whatever, and it's all cool. But are they checking that out? No, they aren't. But the minute I tell them something to do with mental health, or
I know, I went through a bad time, and I like emailed one of my lecturers and asked to have like a task postponed, and she kind of was very like blasé about like, okay, fine, you can like hand it in on that day, but didn't say anything like, I hope that you're managing, or like, if you need more time, like, you can have that. So I think, it is something that it's just not accorded the same level of like relevance or severity. And I think that's something that needs to change. And I think maybe like public health campaigns can help that.
Or just change to gender studies, because we do that all the time.
This was while I was in the humanities department.
Not even the humanities department. Sorry. Philosophy counts as a humanities, and that department
Trash.
They are allowed people to go to daisies, but wouldn't allow people to take time off for Ramadan. So
heck, do you think that in South Africa we have the infrastructure to be able to tackle such a complex issue? Do you think that, when we have so many like very tangible, not that this isn't tangible, it's more that it's not exactly concrete, concrete issues, do you think that there's obviously room for growth, but how do we build the foundations to try and tackle this problem?
Right. I definitely think, just in terms of our constitutional values, we've adopted the social model of disability, right? In terms of our law, the social model of disability really is people who have impairments are categorized as oppressed people, or oppressed persons, right? And so it's up to society to dismantle the oppressive structures and to sort of accommodate people who have impairments, right? It's not for people with impairments to sort of change themselves in any way. And that's different from the medical model, which I know nothing about. But so essentially we have the social model. And why that's important is because sort of when our law adopts a certain model, that should filter into the norms. So that should filter into what we think as human beings socially on the ground, right? I think one thing that will really help in terms of sort of making it more, I don't know, more accessible is sort of to decentralize healthcare. And the reason why I say decentralized healthcare is because a lot of what we're talking about when it's mental health is really left to specialists. And like I said to Naledi, it becomes very niche, right? We only speak about those people when there really is a problem. But when we decentralize it and we actually equip other people within society and within predominantly indigent communities to be able to detect certain behaviors and to at least not diagnose, because they're not psychiatrists, but at least refer those people to psychiatrists, we're able to catch more, and we're able to cover a wide network of people who might be suffering with mental illness for a fraction of the cost, because these people are not necessarily specialists, right? But they've sort of been trained vocationally in that. So I think that could really help in terms of that, because I know, South Africa doesn't have, sort of our fiscal budget isn't that great, isn't that large. And so, we do have to think about how we could do things, or how we can maximize utility, in terms of our budgets. So I think that's really important in terms of making it more of a tangible system within society.
Yeah, also you were saying about like our LO curriculum, and even like teachers in general, I think probably need to be equipped with these skills so that they don't just label children as like problem children.
Yes.
And then can rather like give them the help that they need.
Yes.
I think that's very interesting. And then I think I've got a second question about the corporate world, because I think that I'm also, looking at going into the corporate world. And I think it's an interesting concept. I was speaking to someone who works at a big firm in Joburg, and he was just talking about his general schedule. And I was just thinking about having to go into this situation where you're working like 9 to 9 each day. Yes. And then you like eating takeout, you're not like getting the support you need. You don't have like friends outside the workplace, and you don't have time to socialize. And yeah, I mean, how is that conducive to good mental health, and how do we like try and factor in mental health into a situation that is not structured to support mental health?
Well, I think for the first thing, mental health in our law is categorized under disability, right? And that's important because there are a lot of reasonable accommodations that are given to people who suffer with impairments, right? Or who have impairments rather. So what that does for people who are mentally ill or who have mental illness is that it allows you to negotiate with your employer to say, okay, I'm actually having A, B, and C issues right now. Can we negotiate sort of the conditions and the terms and the scope of my employment to sort of help me be the best that I can be? And sort of the golden rule is, as long as it's not an unjustifiable hardship for your employer, it should be okay. So if you can complete the basic or sort of the core aspects of your job, then you should be fine. So if it means, sir, I need to leave an hour before everyone else for my mental health, right? Then that's something that can be negotiated. If there's somebody who hasn't necessarily been diagnosed or who doesn't suffer with a mental illness, I think that's where stress coping mechanisms needs to come into account. But it shouldn't only be incumbent on the employee. I think that businesses need to do a lot more. Corporate South Africa, private sector South Africa needs to do a lot more in terms of scheduling the workday in such a way that people are able to perform at their best while not sacrificing their mental health. One way that people do this in a number of different jurisdictions is they have 4-day working weeks as opposed to 5-day. And it actually increases productivity when you have a 4-day working week as opposed to a 5-day working week. So it's small things like that where I'm able to have a rest break. I'm able to deal with a lot of the emotions that I'm feeling when I'm in a workspace at home. I'm able to refresh myself and rejuvenate myself and come back and do it all over again. And I think that's really important when we're talking about just working policy and the policy that South Africa takes with regards to the working week. So I do think that businesses and government need to do a lot more in making environments conducive, making environments super conducive for people to perform without sacrificing their mental health.
Great, thanks.
Can I say something about that?
Yes.
I think a lot of companies are now jumping on the bandwagon of mental health, right? Making it a priority, or making it, I don't want to say a priority, but like, you know, when things are really popular, we're like, oh, we need to do something about it, right? But it feels like they keep in the really harsh conditions and put in the Band-Aid on top of, here's a mental health talk, here's a psychologist, right?
Yes.
Putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg isn't going to fix the problem,
Yes.
right?
Also,
So,
I just feel like,
yeah.
oh, sorry, that was completely interrupting you.
No, did you want to carry? It's fine, don't worry.
No, I just feel like the onus becomes like it's incumbent on the employee to seek help, or like to put the structures in place to help themselves, as opposed to it being like a widespread from the top down change. So once again, like you feel like you're the one who has the issue and needs like people to accommodate you, as opposed to it being maybe like, you know, the system doesn't work.
Yes, like you can't just send an email every quarter saying, here are the mental health resources available, right? That's not going to work. You could have the best psychologist, the best medical aid as resources. Send in a once-off email isn't going to do the trick. And I think the difficult thing is that there's a lot of people that are making these decisions that maybe never had to think about actually using these resources, for whether because they didn't actually need them or because they tell themselves they've never needed them, right? So I mean, there's a lot to fix, right? I'm currently working with the company like on the mental health aspect, and like it's quite difficult. Sorry, Mike, we didn't wait for you. And firstly, I don't want to say things that are going to make me come across as weak. So like even, and I think that's a big problem, because you could, like you said, that you could, like, the law covers you. The law covers you, right? But now, am I going to be staffed on another project? Am I going to be promoted at the same rate that everyone else is going to be promoted? Or am I going to be given like a side excuse of, this work you're not cut out for this work. It's better for you to do something else, right?
I also think like when there's someone else who's willing to do the job in those harsh conditions, it automatically puts you on the back seat, you know, like back foot.
So if there's someone that's willing to like stay from 9 to 9 in the office, hours longer than that, right? If you want to keep the job, you're gonna have to do the same, right? And that's where, like, I think if you're in that system, that's where you kind of have to weigh your own mental health and preserving your mental health against the value you put on having the job, right? And I think that's something, maybe like advice for people going into the corporate world. There will be changes to the system, but at some point you're just going to have to decide, am I willing to break myself to keep this job? Right?
Can I also just interject for a second? I think it's going to take some sort of critical mass in corporations for them to really acknowledge the fact that a lot of people that struggle with these issues are actually incredibly gifted at other aspects that contribute to their companies. I don't think it's a coincidence that we find in this group alone that there are so many people that have struggled with really intense emotional or psychological issues, right? We're all high performers. We're all taking on incredible tasks. And I think that it's within the best interest of many corporates to actually foster environments that take care of their people in a way that they can bring out those strengths, but also attract other people that have the compassion and have built the resilience of struggling with these issues.
People fall through the cracks because they get overworked, they burn out. I mean, I've even noticed this with a lot of my friends who studied Chem Eng, which I think everyone like notoriously knows really pushes people, especially on the 4-year program. And it's like, how many people are actually going into care? How many people are taking gap years to like heal from what they went through? And it's like, yeah, it's awesome that we're pushing people to their limits and seeing, you know, what people are capable of, but how many people are we losing? How many great minds are we losing in that process?
But I also wanted to bring up, seeing as my point in the discussion, I've got another question for you, don't worry. I've got many. I just want to space them out. But I think it's also important to realize when we're talking about the legal aspect, like, oh, you know, we kind of protected legally and stuff like that. Think of the life Esidimeni case. The life Esidimeni cases.
Yeah.
Like, that was the biggest, most intense and like attack on I would say mental illnesses.
100%.
So far. And I think that's a big point to say, is that that a lot of these people just got neglected because mental illness is not seen as important as anything else. So they get put into housing and places that just got the money in and ignored the needs of actual people, and that led to many deaths. And I think that's a big issue, is that although legally, sure, you're protected and stuff, are you really legally protected? Because look what happened.
It's what happens on the ground. It's what happens on the ground. So you can have incredible policies. And this is why I say we have amazing policies, but we have poor execution. And that's because the law isn't changing into social norms as quickly and as effectively as it needs to, right? Can you just quickly give some context on the Esidimeni case?
Yeah, so basically, as I said, it's just mental illness patients being put into facilities that weren't equipped to help them. It's so layered. Go look it up. But essentially, that's what it was.
Yeah.
And these people were just getting money in and leaving people to die.
Yeah.
Most of the people that died in that case, my mom she's a health journalist. She was big into that case and speaking about it, is that most of those people died from starvation. And those sort of things that could really, really easily be sorted.
Yeah, 100%.
Things like that could easily be sorted, that could help them if they had a proper structure to help them with their mental health. I think that's really issues that you just push these people aside, and their families wanted to help. Their families, it's not like their families just weren't equipped enough. They weren't wealthy enough. Like, why do you have to be wealthy to be able to deal with mental illness? Why isn't it like your GP? You just go there for even though that is also not affordable, but still, it's more affordable than going to psychologists, psychiatrists, any of that sort of stuff.
Right.
And I think that's a major issue that we have within society that is just very disturbing, which is you spoke about already. So I want to speak about your rehabilitation, speaking about more about rehabilitation in terms of your personal experience.
Right.
Speaking about written things, so you spoke a lot about like it was the written aspect, like with your exams and stuff. So what are the spoken aspects of having that the 3-letter word, the third letter couldn't be, or multiples of 3 couldn't be a thing, and why was this about long sleeves? Like, sorry, if you don't want to talk about it, it's fine, but I just wanted to ask about the.
Right. Okay. So in terms of the written aspect, the verbal aspect, I just wouldn't say words. So I'd actually have to compute in my mind and say, okay, bed has three things. Or if I've already said bed, I'll catch myself and sort of make a little shriek like, or something, but I would have to compute that. So I would say, oh man, I can't wait to go to tonight. I just need to sleep. Right. And so I just skip words. And so people would be like, bro, you're not talking, like, just give me like a coherent sentence. But I couldn't do that because I couldn't risk it. So the reason why those particular letters were sort of anxiety inducing was I'm a Christian, and what we believe is blasphemy against the Holy Spirit is unforgivable, right? And so the Holy Spirit is the third person in a triune God, Trinity. Therefore, he's the third person. The letters D, E, M, and S. E would stand for evil. D would stand for demonic. M would stand for, I can't remember what M was, and I can't remember what S was, but essentially these negative characteristics. And so when you put those negative characteristics in the third position of a word, you're essentially imputing that to the Holy Spirit. Very complex, very, very complex, but that's essentially how I worded it out in my brain. So that caught me up for a couple months. I still get it every now and then. I still have to just keep breathing through it and writing through it. Crossing lines as well was also pretty scary for me. But yeah, working on that every day.
It's so interesting that, like, from the outside, it's so difficult to understand why that would be the case. I mean, it's just come up over and over again in this talk. Like, it seems like such a random thing to think about, and yet it becomes all consuming.
Right.
And I just want to test that, like, I understood something that you said earlier. You were talking about how you don't like it if people say, oh, but you're not going to kill someone.
Yes.
But it's helpful if people start to ask questions about the motivation behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So like in the context of the letters, would it be helpful, for example, to say D may stand for demon, but it also stands for Deus, which is God. And S stands for savior instead of Satan. Would stuff like that be helpful, or would that just go completely over the head and not really?
That's something. Yeah, sorry. That's something that I've been working with a psychiatrist as well. So we try and find words for it. But the sticky thing with OCD is that it tends to focus on the negative. And so it's very difficult for you to remind yourself, oh no, but this could also be this, because there's something at the back of your mind but it could also be this, right? So it's difficult in that aspect. But some people have found that really, really helpful. One thing that I find helpful is just to do it. To be honest, I just had to do it and just get used to it, unfortunately, and just push myself through it. But exactly what you're saying is definitely a practice that is used by psychiatrists and psychologists as well.
Yeah. But I can also understand that if your innate deep down belief is that you're evil, you'll probably find that even if you know that D could stand for Deus, you'd be afraid that you're attributed more to demon instead of Deus. And so you'd have to really address that deep down assumption first.
Yes.
So I get kind of how complex it must be to really deal with these issues.
Yeah, and I also wanted to speak about, about the trivialization again. And I think this is a very important aspect for me personally, because I have a specific thing. I have to use a certain spoon. I have to use certain types of cups. I have to sit in a certain place in my house.
Okay.
And I don't know, it's just how I am. And people, whenever I say, oh, this is the spoon I'm using in your house, like I'll go to a person's house and I'll pick out which teaspoon I'm going to use. Like, it's just something that I do. And people always say, oh, you're being so OCD. Or like my family will say, you're being so OCD. And I'm like, no, this is just like a compulsion that I do. Like, it's just, it's and I think that's the real issue, is that we, like, a lot of people have compulsions. A lot of people have things that are, obsessive, but does not contribute to a full on, because if I do have to sit in a certain place, I'm like, I get a bit uncomfortable, but I mean, that's it. It's not a big.
It's not a disorder. It's not quite a disorder. Yeah.
I think that's to have this idea that we all have certain aspects of our personality that actually sometimes do this sort of stuff, but it's to a different extent, and it's to a larger, bigger. So I think to normalize it says, I'm the type of person who always uses my certain spoon. I'm the type of person who always, does something particular. And to say that's a normal thing. So someone who does something else, let's make that normal for them, and help them through it if it's impeding on themselves. Like, I
think though that in that context, sorry to interject, but I think it also stems a lot from education, is that, like, for example, I had no idea the extent of people who suffer from OCD, like what it actually entailed. And I think that I would then now regrettably say things like, oh, I'm so OCD about this, or I'm so OCD about that. And it's definitely a matter of like actually just having absolutely no idea. And I think what is tough is that there are so many things in life that like you could just have no idea what they are or what it entails to like, you know, trivialize, but in a way that is unintentional. So I suppose like intention is an important part, but also like trying to educate yourself as much as possible on things that you have no idea about.
I guess I think it also does. I mean, I've said it since I was quite young, but I always had an interest in psychology, so that's what I did my undergrad in. So I think especially after that, I was like, you cannot. How dare you say this? Such a, you know, making light of other people's situations. So I think that that's definitely a valid thing.
Yeah.
Can I also just interject for a second on that? It is actually just such an issue in society that we're not confronted by other people's stories enough, which is one of the reasons why this platform is so powerful. I mean, I have been just awestruck most of this conversation, just that Obakhe has struggled through this thing, and it gives me a lot more empathy towards the struggle. Empathy that I would never have if I hadn't been confronted by it and not been able to squirm away, right? And so it also makes me think of another thing that gets trivialized. I know in friendship groups that I've been in, and myself included, if I do something weird, I might say, oh, that was really aspy of me, rather than and it's like, it's Asperger's. It's literally making reference to Asperger's, and I got called out on that some time ago, and I thought, oh, actually, maybe I should investigate this a little bit further. And I actually did some research and tried to find people that have suffered from Asperger's and really hear their stories. And it brought me to a platform or a YouTube channel called Special Books by Special Kids. And if you guys haven't heard about this, it is the most incredible YouTube channel. It's got 2.3 or 2.5 million subscribers. And the host of the channel sits down with people that have struggled with different mental illnesses and converses with them and asks them what their biggest struggles are. Really shows with compassion that there are lots of shared struggles, and that these people aren't scary people, and you can understand them, and you can really be compassionate to their struggles. And I guess like a conversion of that into a question, Obakhe, is would you recommend any resources for people to look up that would help them actually understand these issues a lot more? Like above and beyond.
What can I suggest?
Can I just interject here? Sorry.
Yes.
I just want to say, this also brings up the issue of hearing certain aspects of academia and other things as better than personal experience, which I know you're not trying to do, Mike. But the thing is that saying that, you know, Obakhe's personal experience is, you know, oh, is there any other, like, you know, resources besides your own personal experience, can be problematic in the terms of like, is yours not enough? And is your experience not enough to validate that? But I like the idea of adding on, but I just want to mention a lot of people hear things as above and beyond in terms of academia.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a really important point, but I'm simply asking it in terms of if people want to find out even more and educate themselves more.
So I will say not for you, I just wanted to out, but don't worry, Mike, I know.
Right. So for me, the main things that I use is Instagram, because I think Instagram is just a lot more accessible to a lot of people instead of reading something like DSM-5, right? Which is the diagnostic manual, which is just like, where do I even start? So I think Instagram comes in a lot more sort of, exactly. Instagram comes in a lot more bite-size and sort of accessible formats. Two things. First one is Obsessively Ever After, which is one of the best things, I will also put it in the group chat as well, Obsessively Ever After, she actually struggles with OCD. So she already has that lived experience, and she's sort of supplemented that lived experience with sort of training and education as well on OCD and CBT specifically. So she speaks a lot about different kinds of OCD. And if you go to her highlights, I think she has a book highlight, OCD books highlight, you'll find a lot of different books there, a lot of books on sexual obsessions, etc. and the like. So if you're interested in sort of a more hard copy book, you can look at that. If you're interested in just sort of small bits and pieces, Obsessively Ever After is great. Another one is Mind on Fire, OCD. Mind on Fire OCD does a similar thing to Obsessively Ever After. And so they just show sort of snippets of OCD, but also help people who suffer with OCD to sort of overcome it, or to at least live with it, by reminding them that they're not bad people, that they're not evil human beings, etc.
Or not question, but I guess like what we can discuss more is, you said you went to a psychiatrist when you were 16 and they basically listed a bunch of 5 things that you were diagnosed with, right? I've heard that happen so many times.
Oh, wow.
Where people just go to psychologists, psychiatrists, even psychologists who should consult with a psychiatrist in making diagnoses, and just very like not greatly just, you know, diagnose these things, right? Yeah. So I definitely think that that's a problem in the medical system, right? I think because just diagnosing mental illness isn't a box ticking exercise of you fit these 3 things, therefore you fit into this box, right?
Yes.
And that's why it's so difficult. And I think even when you were speaking about the brain scans, it's like, I'm sure that's a great aspect, but I doubt there would be a one cut, this is an OCD brain, this is a bipolar brain, right? Yeah. Which is so difficult, because I know I have family members who suffer with a lot of these different things, but we've never been able to like come with a diagnosis because it's just so scattered all over the place, right? So like the only way to go through it was like through, I guess, just trying all different types of ways. So did you go through that process as well, where they just diagnosed you with a bunch of stuff, gave you a bunch of medication for depression, for anxiety? I know they always start there, and then build up from there. And they're like, oh shit, this didn't work, bipolar. Oh shit, this doesn't work, schizophrenia. Did you have a similar experience like that? Is my first question. And then my second question would be, what is your relationship, it's going to sound weird, what is your relationship with OCD, in the sense that how do you separate your identity from it?
Wow. Okay. Yeah, just on what you're saying about brain scans, I completely agree with you, which is why I think medicine still has a long way to go, and science has a long way to go in terms of developing and to see certain anomalies and peculiarities, right? Because it could be that, you know, bipolar manifests in a different way in my brain, or in a different way in my context. So it's important to sort of have those peculiarities. Was your second question misdiagnoses? Yes, right?
I said a bunch of words.
Wait, I think it was misdiagnoses. Oh, yes, it was misdiagnoses. So this doctor, the psychiatrist that I went to, he, yes, as I've said, he diagnosed me with a number of different things. Very cold human being, very heartless human being. One thing, I don't think that I ever had to trial different things for different disorders or illnesses. One thing that I'm really proud of myself for at that time was I was very stubborn and outspoken. Immediately just said, no, that's not my reality. And so I was able to say, I sort of understand what I'm seeing. And I sort of know enough about these different illnesses to know that that doesn't fit what's happening in my own body. And I'm not saying that other people can't do that or can do that, but I think it is quite beneficial if you're able to also trust your instinct to a large extent. So no, I didn't necessarily trial a lot of different medication. One thing that did happen is that I changed to another psychiatrist. amazing lady at Akiso, Dr. Ramasa. And I ended up having a very difficult conversation with my previous psychiatrist to say, this relationship isn't working. I just don't think that you understand me as a person. And so I have consulted with another psychiatrist who I'm really happy with, and I would like to ask you to release me to consult with her further. And so those were decisions that honestly, by the grace of God, that I was able to do that at the time. So I didn't necessarily trial with a lot of different medication. I think, to answer your question, now is more of that.
Intersection isn't mutually exclusive. I'm thinking of a Venn diagram right now, but like, yeah.
Right. No, I hear you. So, sure, it's really hard to put it into words. But one thing that I've realized is, okay, first off, I don't believe in romanticizing mental health, right? It's an incredibly painful thing, and just romanticizing it is problematic for a number of reasons. And I know that's not what you're saying, but that's sort of how I've sort of made it in my mind and pictured it in my mind. So that's the first thing. I try not to romanticize it, but I do recognize that people who have OCD tend to have very complex brain systems, and there's some appreciation for that. There's some appreciation for, and this is why on my Instagram page, Wholesome Orbs, the hashtag is your brain is beautiful, because I've had to really learn that my brain is beautiful in the way that it works. And it's true of everyone who's in this sort of on this platform and in the world. Like, your brain is incredibly beautiful. And so I think in terms of my identity, I've just realized that I'm someone who thinks long, hard, deep about things. And it's, I don't know, I think that's probably my identity. And I've been told a lot of the time by psychologists as well, your brain is really complex, or, you think about things a lot. And I think that's something that I can appreciate, because I think for a long time, I really had poor self-esteem coming out of St. Stithians and into university. I honestly thought that I just wasn't bright. Like, I genuinely thought I just wasn't it. And I worked really hard to try and prove to myself that I kind of was. And so it's really reassuring to hear that from other people, to say, actually, maybe you do have some sort of complex computational skills. So that's been what I've taken from OCD. But apart from that, I take nothing from it.
Okay, thank you.
So I was gonna say a lot just about how immense my respect is. Just knowing you for a good few years now, and just seeing how much you are light in a room, and you just are incredible. To also know that you've dealt with these intense struggles just adds a whole new level of respect, and just, it's amazing. And the fact that you've just shared this story now with everyone, and had the kind of vulnerability there to do that, I think is powerful. And I hope that it reaches a lot of people, and a lot of people really empathize more with struggles like this. The question that I was going to ask has sort of been touched on already, but I think it's still worth pointing out again. It strikes me that throughout your struggle, you've been fortunate, at least in some way, to be able to have like therapists, and be able to see people and have the medication and everything like that. And I just, it really, like, I struggle with the idea that there are so many people out there in South Africa and the world who just don't have those resources. Yeah. I mean, it goes from diagnostics to the financial means to cover medication to everything. Yeah. And it's not so much a question as a comment. Especially now, you said that stress really brings out your OCD.
Yeah.
It strikes me that with COVID, and the fact that people are losing jobs, and the fact that they're struggling to put food on the table, and the amount of people that must be struggling with issues like this, and other mental disorders and mental illnesses, it's heartbreaking. And I don't know what we could do to address that. I feel quite helpless about it.
No, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, sorry, it's a very dark point, but it's just something that's been troubling me.
It's so true. I think something that's I've really thought about is the decentralization of healthcare, which is something that I alluded to.
Yeah.
But it's the idea that we can't. The problem is way too big for it only to be addressed by sort of specialists. It's just too big to be kept in the realms of sort of expensive psychiatrists and psychologists. It needs to be decentralized, right? We need to have lay counselors. We need to train lay counselors in communities. We need to have community-based sort of resources. I know Doctors Without Borders also tries to deal with mental health as well in terms of dispensing medication. So we can give to these humanitarian organizations and specify exactly what we're giving to. We want to give more to mental health. We want to do A, B, and C, right? So I think that's really important. I think it's important, again, community education as well, to remind people. I know in my family, we didn't tell my family that I was struggling with OCD because they assumed that I was bewitched, essentially. Sure. My dad said, no, nobody's telling anybody anything, which is unfortunate because I don't think that all families are like that, and I don't think there's anything wrong with, you know, that sort of spirituality. But I do think, you know, yeah, community education, community-based education is really important at a local level, at a rural level, at an urban level as well. Yeah, that's what I think. I think give as much as you can to organizations, and I'm sure I'll research some as well, that really work in terms of mental health, and start to sort of innovate and ideate around that as well.
Those are powerful points. Thank you. Thank you.
So I understand that there's a level of mental health or mental illnesses, right, that becomes debilitating to live, and it's so difficult just to function every day. But there's another aspect of it where I'm like, are you mentally ill, or is the system mentally ill? Like, why do we, you know what I mean? I'm talking like a hypothetical universe of like, just a out of the box question here. But like, we have this system where we say these people are thinking right. But to me, capitalists, like anyone who's winning at capitalism, to me should be in a psychiatrist's office, busy checking if they're a psychopath. But we reward that. We're saying that that's cool. They're driven. They're awesome. They're super motivated. But actually, like, there's a huge bunch of like incredibly unempathetic, selfish attributes to that. But then people are saying someone like you is mentally ill when you have so many incredible attributes. Do you know what I'm trying to say? This is like a super box, like random question.
I think this has, just, I guess, academically, this has a lot of its foundations in the Industrial Revolution and sort of the shift to very rational scientific thinking. And, you know, a very sort of, rational, very calculated way of behaving and reasoning. And the minute somebody acts outside of that, the minute somebody shows a lot of emotion, for example, which is usually associated more with, I think, romantics, I'm not too sure, but there's sort of this disavowal of emotion. There's take emotion out of scientific analysis, take it out of things that we do from a day-to-day basis. And the minute that somebody shows some sort of emotion or some sort of reaction instead of response, we immediately stigmatize that person and we remove them as sort of being a social deviant, right? And so I do think that the Industrial Revolution and capitalism in general has had a major effect on how we view mental illness in general. Okay, I'm a socialist sister. I believe in a social democratic state. But yeah, I do think that capitalism has really resulted in a lot of social ills, both mentally, socially, culturally, religiously as well. all of.
On top of that as well is that, so because you're expected to fit into this norm, that actually causes a lot of you know, disturbance in your mind.
Yes.
But I think it's also important to say that although we can say, these systems are the problem, these systems as well, when we know that fundamentally within your brain there's a difference, which difference can be different. It depends on what type of mental illness you have. But the issue is that if it is impacting on your physiological, on your way of just eating, being, you know, all that sort of fundamental stuff that has actually relatively not a lot to do with, okay, obviously, of course, everything has to do with capitalism, in general. But in terms of, if that affects your fundamental functioning, not in terms of like my academics, my in the workplace, then it is still important to say, okay, I need help. There's something to do. And it's not just the system. Sometimes it's just, how your mental processing is working. So I think that's a really important thing to say, is that I always just, I hate this idea of, saying, oh, but if we have a different system, our lives would be better. Sure, a lot of people's lives would be better, but there's still going to be some people who need support. So, yeah.
100%.
I have one last very open-ended question that is coming from a place where I know very little about psychology. But in terms of our society in South Africa and like Western notions of psychology, how do you think it could be adapted to South Africa? I know my dog was sticking his head through the window, so I had to go and chase him away. But I heard you speaking about people saying people are bewitched, and things like that, where there's like some stigmatization against mental health. But then also, like, do you think that the current like system of diagnoses and like the way that we learn about psychology is predominantly like Western thought? And do you think that it fits like the African perspective?
Jeez, that's incredible. On one hand, I think that the African perspective has a lot to lend with regards to thinking about mental illness and mental health. The reason why I say that is because I really believe that it's sort of cross-dimensional when you look at mental health. It's not only physiological, it's spiritual, it's emotional, it's physical, and it touches on a lot of those different things. And so I think when we're looking at sort of African philosophy and African spirituality, that sort of adds something. Even if it's just religion in general, it adds a sort of a perspective to say, as much as, yes, we're dealing with something that can be scientifically observed in the case of Western medicine, we're also dealing with something that is inherently emotional and almost metaphysical in its sort of configuration, right? So I think African spirituality and African philosophy has a lot to lend, in spirit and soul, has a lot to lend to understanding mental illness. But I think in the same vein, Western medicine, Western education has a lot to lend in terms of understanding, because they all come with different perspectives and viewpoints. I think it's just to channel that perspective in terms of African spirituality, instead of saying maybe the person is bewitched or whatever. It's just to channel it to say it might still be spiritual, but in a different way or in a different aspect. So I do think that Western education is still important. I'm very pro-medication, to be honest. It's really done something, it's been really incredible for me in my own walk. So I do think it has its place. And I still do think that indigenous ways of being also have a very important place in understanding mental illness.
And if you just look at the DSM, my brother's currently doing his master's in clinical psychology, so he always asks me to test him on things. So I have the DSM on my phone, like.
Oh wow.
Casual stuff. So I always look through this because we always speak about this, and the lack of cultural aspects and yes. helping within. So they'll do a one-liner like, "Oh, if it's outside the norm." Like, wow. It's like a one, if it's outside this, then you can. But what do they know? Do the people who are diagnosing you like know that this is outside the norm? Because a lot of the time, I mean, if you're speaking to your ancestors, right? So if you're Sangoma, right, like a practicing one, technically within some of the DSM, you would be diagnosed as having a mental illness, but we all know that most of those people can function within society. And I think my issue is that we come with the idea of that, oh, this equals mental illness.
Right.
You know, and you have to fit these ticks, you know, like when everyone did the psychopath test and they're like, whoa, I'm ticking so many boxes. The problem comes about is when we go, okay, but what do those boxes actually look in practice?
Right.
And if someone's going straight from the DSM and just saying, let me just apply this exactly, I think that's where a lot of problems come about.
Yeah.
Is not taking in the cultural, not taking in the spiritual, not taking in, you know, various different factors.